Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
So, in the last class, we have been discussing the definition of algorithms, what is a problem, what is an instance of a problem, what are the parameters of a problem, and things like that. And then we had also discussed how to write an algorithmic description for various different problems. Some of them were, just to recap, sequential search, adding array of numbers, multiplying two matrices, binary search, etc. And we said that in today's lecture, we will discuss a little bit more details of analyzing the efficiency of an algorithm. So in order to do this, we will invoke the two examples that we have seen last day. So one example was sequential search versus the binary search technique. Okay, so we'll try to, in order to get a notion of the efficiency of an algorithm, we will try to get an idea of the differences between the sequential search technique and the binary search technique. So for the sake of argument, let us assume that the search key X is not present in the array S. Okay, so this is our condition. We will assume that the search key X is not present in the array S. So then in this case, for sequential search, how many comparisons you will have to do? So you have to compare, no matter whatever is the case, you have to compare each and every element of S, starting from S1 to Sn. You will have to compare each of this element, okay, compare each of S1 through Sn with X, right? So sequential search actually makes you compare each and every individual element in S with X, and therefore no matter whatever is the input condition, okay, we have to always make n comparisons, okay, in order to conclude that X is not present in the list S. So you have to make n comparisons to conclude that X is not present in S, right? So you cannot do any better. Now let us see binary search. Okay, this can be best understood taking an example. Let us say that we have our elements, okay, in S indexed from 1 to 32. Okay. So let's say there are 32 items in the list. Okay. So basically this means that n is equal to 32. Okay. So there are 32 elements in the list. Again, we assume that X is not present in S. Okay. And without any loss of generality, we could assume any one of the uh, two following cases. Let us say that X is larger than all the elements present in S. You could have also done the same thing with the consideration that X is smaller than all the elements in X, so in S. So this is a symmetric case. But for the sake of argument, let us say that X is larger than all the elements present in S. Okay. If this is the situation, then let's see how many comparisons we have to make. So the first comparison that we will make is at X with S mid. Okay. So that will be the comparison with S16. So this is our comparison number 1. So this is the first comparison that we are making. Okay. Now, of course, this will fail. So then, and since X is larger than all the elements, the next comparison that we are going to make should be with S24, right? So this is the second comparison. Now again, this is going to fail. So then we will go to S28 because we have assumed that X is larger than all the elements. So this is our third comparison. Okay. This will again fail. We will go to the S30. This would be our fourth comparison. Then S31. This would be our fifth comparison. Okay. And then S32 is the sixth comparison. Okay. So you see that we are actually having to make 6 comparisons. Okay. Starting from S16 up to S32. Now, if you look a little more carefully, then you will observe that what this number of comparisons boil down to is the following. So 6 is log 2 of 32 plus 1. So log 2 of 32 is 5, as you know, and 5 plus 1 is 6. So anytime, okay, you have n elements in S, the number of comparisons with X that needs to be done is log 2 n plus 1, assuming that x is not present in the array S. So now you see, if you take the sequential search, no matter what is the input condition, if x is not present in the set of elements to be searched for, to be searched from, then sequential search would take n comparisons, whereas a binary search would take log to n plus 1 comparison. Okay, so you can at least have an intuition that the binary search is a more efficient way of searching elements in a set or a list of elements. Okay, so because it does much less number of comparisons, okay, in contrast to a sequential search. Now, the one thing that you have to remember, that for binary search, although we are getting this advantage has an assumption, and never forget that assumption. The assumption is that the elements in S are already sorted. Okay, unless this assumption holds, binary search will not be successful. However, whatever is the case, if you have a set of elements or a list of elements which you know is already sorted, then you can, or it is always more effective or more efficient to use a binary search compared to a sequential search. So just to give you an idea, if you have different array sizes, okay, and if you try to compute the number of sequential search comparisons versus the binary search comparisons, then very soon you will see that we start getting astronomical numbers in case of sequential search. Say if you have an array size of 128 elements, you need 128 comparisons, whereas for binary search you just need 8 comparisons. If you have 1024, you will need 1024. However, here you will need 11 comparisons. Suppose you have a very large number, then you will need those many comparisons for sequential search, whereas you will just need 33 comparisons for a binary search. Okay, so this I hope has given you some idea of the concept of efficiency that I was talking about. Okay, so we will now look into one more example which will make things even more explicit and show you the importance of algorithmic efficiency. Now this example that I am showing you is, I think, one of the most well-known problems in computer sciences, and I guess all of you have written one or more versions of code for this particular problem. the Fibonacci sequence. Okay, so the task here or the problem here is to find out the nth term of the Fibonacci sequence. Okay, so this is what is my problem statement, and I guess all of you remember from your programming and data structure course that the Fibonacci sequence follows a particular formula as the one that I am writing down. F0 is 0, F1 is 1, and any other term Fn is equal to Fn minus 1 plus Fn minus 2 for any n greater than equal to 2, right? So now if you are asked to write a simple algorithm for finding out the nth term in a Fibonacci sequence, I think all of you have done this exercise, but just for a recap, let us again write a small piece of formal description for the problem. So our problem, as I already said, is to determine the nth term in the Fibonacci sequence. Input is a non-negative integer n. Mark the term non-negative. This means it could be 0 or more. Okay. Output the nth term of the Fibonacci sequence. So it's very simple. Int, let's say we describe it by the function fib, int n. If n is less than equal to 1, return n, else return fib n minus 1 plus fib n minus 2. Right? So a very simple recursive code. So I hope all of you have got an introduction to recursive programming in your programming and data structure course. So this is a recursive version of the computation of the Fibonacci sequence. Now, as you can already understand that this implementation or this way of finding Fibonacci term is having a caveat. Okay, and what is the caveat? The caveat is that this involves, so the caveat of this implementation is that it involves recomputation of the same Fibonacci term multiple times. And how do you understand this? Just by drawing a simple recursion tree or a call tree. Okay, if you draw a call tree, you will immediately understand why this is so. So let us try to draw the call tree. So let us say that we want to compute Fibonacci term 5. So this is, if you go by the code that we have written, this will call fib3 and fib4. Okay, fib3 will in turn call fib1 and fib2, and fib2 in turn will call fib0 and fib1. Similarly, on the other side, fib4 will call fib2 and fib3. Fib2 will call fib0 and fib1. Fib3 will make a call to fib1 and fib2, and as you have seen, fib2 will make a call to fib0 and fib1. So you see that immediately as you draw the recursion tree, things get very clear to us. So fib3 is being called twice. Okay, fib1 is being called 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. Okay, similarly fib0 is called 1, 2, 3 times. Fib2 is called 1, 2, 3 times. So you see many of the terms are being recomputed multiple times. Okay, and this actually makes the recursive implementation of the Fibonacci sequence very inefficient. Okay, because you are computing the same function multiple times. So if someone asks you like how inefficient or how many terms does the implementation that we have seen just now actually computes, okay, so can we make an estimate of this? So let us write a small table to see if we can get some clue. Okay, so let's say we make a table of n and the number of terms computed. If my n is 0, the number of terms computed is 1. If my n is 1, the number of terms computed is 1. If my n is 2, the number of terms computed is 3. If my n is 3, the number of terms computed is 5. If my n is 4, the number of terms computed is 9. If my n is 5, the number of terms computed is 15. If my n is 6, the number of terms computed is 25. And you see, this table is easy to verify. So if you look at the recursion tree that I have drawn just a while ago, you will see that in order to compute fib 4, you really need to compute, okay, 9 terms. Let us see how. So let's say we have fib 4 here. This has to compute fib 2 and fib 3. Then fib 2 has to compute fib 0 and fib 1. Fib 3 has to compute fib 1, fib 2, and fib 2 again has to compute fib 0 and fib 1. So you see, let us see, count now how many number of computations that we do. Number of computations, 1 computation, 2 computation, 3 computation, 4 computation, 5 computation, 6 computation, 7 computation, 8 computation, and finally 9 computation. The 9 computations that you have to do in order to compute fib 4. So you see the table, therefore the table entries get validated in this way. So now if you look carefully at this table, there is something interesting that comes out. So again, consider n and the number of terms. See, for n equals 4, you need to compute 9 terms. Whereas for n equals 6, you need to compute 25 terms. And you will find this pattern continuing as you proceed further. So what is the pattern? So we see that as soon as n proceeds by 2 steps, the number of terms that we need to compute becomes more than double. Okay. So you see, 4 becomes 6, so it has moved 2 steps. The number of computations is more than 18. So 9 plus 9, 18, and 25 is larger than 18. So this is a pattern that you will observe all through. If you keep on expanding this table, then this pattern is always observed. So therefore, we can write a very simple expression as follows. Tn, that is the number of terms computed, okay, for finding the nth Fibonacci sequence. So for nth number in the Fibonacci sequence or nth Fibonacci term, the number of terms computed should be larger than twice of the number of terms computed 2 steps before. Okay, so this is basically as we have seen. So T6 is larger than 2 into T4. Okay, so T6 is 25 is larger than 2 into 9. Okay. So this is what we are trying to say, and this holds for n larger than equal to 2. This always holds for n larger than equal to 2. So now from this, can we try to come up with a more generalized expression for Tn? So we have Tn greater than 2 into Tn minus 2. So that we can write is greater than 2 into Tn minus 4. And we can keep on unfolding this recursion up until and how many such terms that will be there? There will be n by 2 such terms because you are proceeding in steps of 2. Okay. Now since we have seen that T0 is equal to 1, therefore this implies that Tn is greater than 2 power n by 2. Of course, for n is greater than equal to 2. For n less than 2, this does not work. Okay. And you can easily validate it. So if T1 for T1 is equal to 1, right? And 1 is actually less than 2 power half. So for T equals 1, this expression does not hold. Okay. Now this was an informal technique. Can we try to formally prove this point? Okay. We will now try to formally prove that this is the so in order to formally prove this point, we will use the induction technique. Okay, so the proof technique that we will use is the induction that we have learned in our school times. Okay, so the theorem is as follows: if Tn is the number of terms in the recursion tree corresponding to the recursive Fibonacci sequence computation algorithm, then for n greater than or equal to 2, Tn should be strictly larger than 2 to the n by 2. Okay. Now the proof. Base condition. Now, as you understand, we need two base cases here, okay? Because the result of any step actually has to assume the values of the two previous steps. So, we need two base cases. So, for n equals to, we can compute T2, okay? This is the number of comparisons, sorry, the number of terms that you have to compute is 3, okay? And 2 to the power n by 2 in this case is equal to 2 to the power 2 by 2. So therefore, T2 is larger than 2 to the power 2 by 2. Okay. Similarly, for n equals 3, T3 is equal to 5. Now 2 to the power 3 by 2 is equal to 2.83. This implies that T3 is indeed larger than 2.83. Now, given that the base conditions hold, we can proceed for the induction hypothesis. So, our induction hypothesis is as follows. Okay. We assume that the statement is true for all m strictly less than n. Okay. So this means that for any value less than any value m strictly less than n, the condition Tm greater than 2 to the power Tm by 2 is valid. Okay. So such kind of, such kind of um, induction hypothesis is typically called strong induction. Okay. So you assume that for all previous cases, this is true. So in this case, formally speaking, for any value of m strictly less than n, we have Tm now. Given this, we write the induction step. So we have to show that Tn is indeed greater than 2 to the power n by 2. Now, how are we going to show this? So we know that Tn can be obtained as Tn minus 1 plus Tn minus 2. Now, since n minus 1 and n minus 2 are strictly less than n, so therefore, for them, the induction hypothesis should hold. And we can write that this expression is larger than 2 to the n minus 1 by 2 plus 2 to the n minus 2 by 2 plus 1. Okay. And without any loss of generality, we can write that this is larger than 2 to the n minus 2 by 2 plus 2 to the n minus 2 by 2, which is 2 into 2 to the n minus n by 2 2 to the n by 2 minus 1, which is nothing but 2 to the n by 2. Okay. So as simple as that. So now, using the induction technique, we have been able to prove that the number of terms that need to be computed, if you go by the recursive algorithm, should be larger than 2 to the n by 2. Then question is, as we were talking about efficiency, is there a more efficient way? Okay, is there a more efficient way to compute the terms in the Fibonacci series? And it turns out that there is indeed a way. And I guess many of you have already correctly identified the way. So what we have to do is, rather than, recomputing the same thing multiple times, why don't we save the computations? Save the computations and reuse them later. Okay. This actually would help us to reduce the number of comparisons. Let's see how to do it. So this will actually help us, get rid of a large number of recomputations. Okay. So, and how are we going to achieve it? Again, a very simple technique. Let's try to have a simple iterative algorithm. Let's call it efficient Fibonacci computation. Again, the problem here is the same. Determine the nth term in the Fibonacci sequence. Input a non-negative integer n, output the nth Fibonacci term, and the iterative version may be called efficient fib. We define an index I. We have the elements f0 to fn to be stored in an array. Let us set f0 to 0, and if n greater than 0, we set f1 to 1, and then for I equals to I less than equal to n, I plus plus, fi equal to fi minus 1 plus f plus 2. So you see, now using this algorithm, we have very trickily reduced the number of computations to only how many? Since it starts from 0 and ends at n, we have to compute only n plus 1 terms as only n plus 1 terms, as we are on the fly saving the terms which will be required later on, and therefore we are not required to recompute the same term again and again. Okay, so just to give you an idea, if you would have used the recursive function, okay, say just a comparison of the recursive version and the iterative version. Okay, suppose you were to compute the Fibonacci number, okay, for n equals 120, then for the iterative version you would need somewhere around 100 nanoseconds, whereas the recursive version would take you roughly close to 36 years. Okay. So you see, now with this example, I guess the concept of efficiency of an algorithm has become more clear to you. In case you have doubts, let me know and we can discuss them over the interaction sessions. So now, since we have got a little bit of idea of the efficiency of algorithms, we would talk about or introduce us to complexity analysis. So, complexity analysis actually is basically trying to understand, okay, the or having an intuition about the running time of an algorithm. Okay. Now we have a few questions with us, okay, which we have to give answer before we proceed. Suppose I say that if running time is the way to do the complexity analysis of an algorithm, how do I measure running time? So the question that we pose is, how do we make an estimate of the running time of an algorithm? And as soon as you ask this question, there can be quite a few answers that can be cited. Okay, let's see how logical or how correct each of these answers are. One answer could be measure the CPU cycles. Now the question is whether this is a correct measure. Now you see that this immediately does not look to be a correct measure because CPUs may vary, the CPU power may vary across computers. So if you run an algorithm or an instance of an algorithm in more specific uh, on say your laptop and say in a high speed server or say in a supercomputer, the running time required will be very different. Okay, so therefore CPU cycle is not a correct way of estimating the running time. The next thing that you can come up with, we can be a little more clever and we can come up with, say, the number of instructions. Okay. Now, again, the question is this a good measure? Now, you see, number of instructions means like more colloquially, the number of lines of code. Now, with the age of Python, I guess many of you are already aware that, you know, uh, in some languages, you need to write more number of instructions to do a certain task compared to some other languages. Okay. And this is a very simple comparison would be if you compare C with Python. Okay. So there are many inbuilt functions that you can use in Python which are not available directly in C, and you have to write more lines of code. So therefore, the same algorithm, if you are implementing in different languages, would require you to use different number of instructions. So therefore, this is also not a good way of or a correct way of measuring the running time. And there could be many other, such complex. So you can keep on increasing the complexity, but you will see that at some point so there could be more complex items that could be studied. But you will see that whatever complex item you assume, there will be some or the other problem. So the issue here is something that we need to understand more carefully. So we need what we need is a standard technique to I estimate the running time. Okay, we need a standard estimate or a standard technique to estimate the running time of an algorithm which will not be sensitive to the type of CPU you are using or the number of lines of code you are using, etc. etc. So then the question is, how do we come up with such a measure? Okay, so the best way to identify or to estimate the running time is to observe that. So you have to make a careful observation here that no matter what CPU you use, whatever programming language you are coding, okay, if your input size increases, okay, if n increases, n is what we call the input size, okay, if your input size increases, then there is a increase, there is an increase in the, there is some sort of an increase in the running time of the algorithm. So with the increase in n, there will be an increase in the running time of the algorithm. So if you recall the example of the sequential search, okay, versus binary search. See, in both the cases, what happened was that the number of comparisons with X depended upon the input size n. So if the input size would grow, the complexity for or the number of comparisons that you have to do would be larger. Okay, so it could be sequential search, it could be binary search, whatever it is. In both cases, if the number of elements in the list, that is n, if that increases, then there will be a rise in the running time. Okay, so and what I have been telling you so far is that there is some minimal computation that you have to always do, okay, while executing an algorithm. So for instance, again consider the sequential search or the binary search example. In both cases, the minimal computation that you have to do in order to, identify whether X is in S or not is to do a comparison. Okay. And depending on the type of the algorithm you propose, the number of comparisons vary. But in all cases, both in sequential search and the binary search, the number of comparisons is actually proportional to n, that is the input size. Okay, if you recall, the number of comparisons here was n and the number of comparisons in this case was log 2 n plus 1. Okay, so in both cases the number of comparisons is actually a function of n. It is proportional to n, or the input size. So this kind of minimal computation like comparison here is called a basic operation. Okay, this is a basic operation that you need to implement an algorithm. In short, I will be calling this as basic op all through the course. Okay, so a basic operation or a basic op is the minimal computation that you need to execute an algorithm, and this is the number of basic ops that you need to do is typically proportional to the size of the input. Now, given these two terms, so now we have got two terms. One term is the input size, and the other term is the basic op. Note that these are the two most important ingredient of the complexity analysis of any algorithm. So, and complexity analysis in specific is a mechanism to determine the number of times some basic op is executed as a function of the input size. So it refers to determining the number of times some basic op is executed as a function of the input size. So this is what is in a nutshell the complexity analysis of an algorithm. Now, if you recall the different algorithms that we did in the previous class, each of them we can actually identify the input size as well as the basic op. For instance, for sequential search, what was the input size? The input size was n, okay, and the basic op was the comparison of the elements in S with X. Okay. Similarly, binary search. Same thing. Add elements in array. Again, input size n, basic op, computation of the sum in each step.